Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. So there are a few sales coming up in the next few weeks. For example, Singles Day is going to be this week, which is a big holiday in China, and then also Black Friday is coming at the end of this month. And you know, one of the things about me is I'm kind of a cheapskate, and so I love looking around for the best deals. And so in this video, I'm going to show you a few different tricks. For example, I'm going to show you the websites that I go to and the method that I use when I do my own shopping. On top of that, I have some suggestions when it comes to different price points when it comes to budget-based retro handhelds. And so in this video, I'm going to show off my favorite budget handhelds and then also some of the methods I use to make sure I get the best deals possible. This is kind of going to be a fun one, so without any further delay, let's jump into it. Okay, to start, here is AliExpress. Now, AliExpress looks like a typical storefront, but it's a little bit different. I like to think of it as a compilation of different vendors all in one place. And basically what that means is that when you go into this website, there's going to be various vendors who sell the same products, but on different pages. And some of these are official stores, like the Ambernick and Powkitty stores, but other ones are generic dropshippers. And so because of that, you're going to see a wide variety of prices for the same models. And if you're lucky, you might find a model that's much cheaper than retail price. For example, $55 for the RG280V is a really great price. And they're already preloading up the Singles Day or the November 11th sale prices here, so it looks even better. But sometimes looks can be deceiving. For example, you can see here they're showing an RG351P for $65. That's a great price. But when you actually click on the product page, it'll show you that there are various models available from this same listing. And the model that's priced at $65 is not the RG351P, it's actually the RG350. This is an older model with a slower chipset. If you were to actually click on the RG351P, you can see the price goes up to $84. Still cheaper than the $95 list price, but it's still nowhere near $65. So this is one of the many ways that some of these storefronts will try to grab your attention. Let's try another one here. Here's the RG280V again. This is the $55 one. That's a great price. This usually will go upwards of $80. Now, when I start to consider whether or not to buy from a store, there are other factors I look at too. For example, I look at whatever feedback they have. And so you can see here it has a 94% feedback. That's actually pretty good. Anything above 90 is good. I also like to check and see how long the store's been around. This one's been around for 4 years now, so that's a long time. So in general, in terms of feedback as well as the time that this store's been around, this actually looks to be fairly reliable. So this would be a store that I'd be willing to buy from. Another thing I like to check is how many orders have been made for that model. So 372 orders have been made from this storefront since they started listing it. That's a good amount as well. If it only shows 1 or 2 orders, I typically tend to stay away from those stores. So at $56, this looks to be a really good deal, but not quite so fast. If we scroll down a little bit more, you can see that it's shipping out of the United States. And if you live in the US, that's going to give you much faster shipping than shipping from China. But the trick here is that they're going to charge you for shipping. As you can see, it's $11 for shipping, so all of a sudden it's $67 for this device. Now if we choose to ship it from China, it'll actually go down a little bit from $67. Instead, it'll only be $64. And honestly, that's still a pretty good price. Anything below $70 for this device is good, and sometimes you'll be able to stack up coupons or other discounts and get it for under $60. And so yeah, those are a couple tricks that I use when I look at AliExpress. I check to make sure that it's shipping out of China, or whether or not I'm willing to pay the extra shipping cost out of the United States. And then I also make sure that it's actually selecting the correct model based on the listing. But yeah, overall, $64 for the RG280V, pretty good price. Now say you search for a specific model. Let's stick with the RG280V here. As you can see, there's a ton of listings for this device, and the prices are all over the map. So let's check this one here. It's listed for $60, and it has at least 27 units sold. And it also says free shipping, so it does look to be maybe a good deal. But when you click on it, you can see it ships out of the US, and it charges quite a bit for shipping. And shipping out of China is about $70, so the other listing is actually better. Now, sometimes you can find these devices on Amazon too. For example, you can see it's listed here for $79, and that looks pretty good too, except that they charge $30 for delivery, so this is obviously not a good choice. If you search for it on Amazon, the cheapest you're going to find it right now at least is $95. And that's quite an uptick from the $65 we saw on AliExpress, but this is going to ship super fast. You'll get it in a few days, and then also you'll have the ability to do free returns in case you're not really sure about whether or not you want to keep the device. And some people find find that that little bit of peace of mind is totally worth it. It's really going to be up to you whether or not you want to take the gamble with AliExpress or try something a little bit more secure like Amazon. Now, AliExpress is not the only Chinese storefront you have available. Another one that I look at every once in a while is Banggood. And this one does act more like a traditional Amazon. This is just a single retailer. And so because of that, you'll typically only find one listing per device, and the prices will be relatively fixed. And Banggood in particular does charge a little bit for shipping, but the prices are usually minimal. Overall, the prices tend to be a little bit higher on Banggood than it does on AliExpress, but you don't have to worry about any shady listings or things like that. Instead, you really just want to try to find and compile as many coupons as you can find and get on their mailing list and things like that. Another very similar experience is TomTop. This store basically acts like Amazon as well. They have a single retailer, they have all sorts of coupons and deals, especially around this time of the year. And so if you want to play that coupon clicking game, there may be an opportunity here to get something for very cheap. This store is kind of like a cross between Wish.com and AliExpress. Wish.com has all sorts of cheap and crappy things, but they do have some quality devices on this store as well. But like with Banggood, sometimes the prices can be a little bit more than AliExpress. So just another thing to consider is that you probably want to look at all three of these websites. And in general, I mostly use AliExpress for all of my shopping. And sure, it can take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks to ship to me here in Hawaii from China, but all the same, it's the best place to get deals. Okay, that's all of my shopping tips, so now let's talk a little bit about my favorite budget handheld devices. And for this part of the video, we're going to use 3 different personas, and these are 3 characters that my son drew for me today, and he did a great job. We're going to name these Jeffrey, Veronica, and Salacious Crumb. Yeah, I know that last one's weird, but you know, his parents were really into Return of the Jedi. And each of these characters represent a different price point. Jeffrey is looking at a $30 to $40 range, mostly for gifts and things like that. Veronica is willing to step up her price just a little bit more to make sure she gets some pretty good quality. And Salacious Crumb, this guy's a little bit more picky when it comes to his handhelds, so he's willing to fork out up to $80 for his. And I should mention the prices I'm going to show for each of these models is mostly based on the average sale price that I can find when I do a little bit of digging. And so if you go over to TomTop or Banggood, you may not see these prices listed for these devices, but if you clip enough coupons or you find a good deal on AliExpress, you can definitely find them within this price range. Okay, so I'm going to show off 3 devices per category. We're going to start with the cheapest one here with Jeffrey at $30 to $40 per device. So first up is the Powkiddy V90. This goes anywhere from $30 to $35, and it can run Super Nintendo and below. Now this clamshell device is actually super portable because you can close up the screen, you don't have to worry about damaging it. It has all the ports I like, a volume wheel and a headphone jack. It has both shoulder and trigger buttons, and like I mentioned, a clamshell design. Now this doesn't have analog sticks, it's just a D-pad, your face buttons, and a function button. But it does have stereo speakers, which is not very common in some of these lower priced devices. Now it doesn't turn on when you open it, I already had it turned on, but you can see this is the user interface here. It's actually pretty good. You just navigate to your system and then pick your game and away you go. Now this is a custom firmware that I installed, but I have videos for that here on this channel. In general, I would say this is best suited for handheld systems, things like Game Boy and Game Gear and things like that. And it can play a tiny bit of PS1 games, but that takes a lot of work. I would just recommend keeping this to 16-bit and below. But yeah, overall, this is an easy system to work with, and I love the clamshell design. Okay, next up we have one that came out this year. This is the Powkiddy Q20 Mini. This thing costs anywhere from $35 to $40, and it actually has the exact same chipset and performance as the V90 we just saw. Now I haven't upgraded the firmware on this one. This is actually what it'll look like out of the box, but same experience here. You're going to pick your system, then pick your game, and away you go. And much like the V90, this can play all the way up to Super Nintendo. Now this one has a smaller screen. It's only 2.4 inches compared to 3 inches with the V90, but it has most of the features that I appreciate. You know, a volume wheel, and then it has shoulder buttons but no trigger buttons, but honestly, none of the games you're going to play on here are going to require triggers anyway. This one is a very lightweight device, so it's very easy to pocket, but at the same time, it does feel very cheap because of how light it is. And on top of that, it only has a mono speaker instead of stereo sound. But all the same, this one works really well. The buttons are good, the D-pad is good, and I like how rich and vibrant the screen is despite being only 2.4 inches. So I think if you're looking for a device that's fairly pocketable and has a nice display and maybe would be a good gift for a child, I think this is a good choice. My kids love this one. And to turn this one off, you just need to tab over to the settings section and then select power off. Okay, next up is the TrimUI Model S, also known as the Powkiddy A66. This one tends to be a little bit more pricey, but you can usually find it for $40. Now what makes this one unique is just how small and pocketable it is. It has really nice and clicky face buttons as well as a D-pad, and it just sits really flush. It's about the size of a credit card altogether. It does have these two tiny and clicky shoulder buttons up top. They work just fine. But like with the other two models, this really can only handle 16-bit games and below, and so I wouldn't expect to use the shoulder buttons that much anyway. Overall, this is a very sleek and slim device. It's one of my favorites. And I've loaded it up here with a custom firmware, which is also available in one of my videos, and it works really well. It's very simple. It's called Mini UI. Now, because it's so small, there are quite a bit of compromises with this device, primarily the fact that it only has a 2-inch screen. And so while this is a great solution when you're on the go, this is not something you'd want to really sit on a couch and play that much. It's just so small. So this works really well if you want something in your purse, but I'm not really sure you'd want this as your primary device. One thing that's unique about this device across all the devices in this video is it doesn't need a software shutdown. You can actually just flip the switch off and it'll turn off nicely. The rest actually require a software shutdown. But yeah, this is the Trim UI Model S. It's really neat looking and fun to play. Okay, moving on up, we're going to do Veronica. She is looking at the $40 to $50 price point. We're going to start with the Anbernic RG300. Now this is the IPS screen model, make sure you look for that one in particular. And this is actually the first Anbernic handheld device. It looks a lot like the RG351V, just a bit smaller. It even has these same layered shoulder buttons, but only L1 and R1. This also doesn't have an analog stick, just a D-pad and the face buttons and some function buttons. But overall, I would think of this like a smaller version of the Game Boy. It has a nice volume wheel, which I really appreciate, and overall the screen looks really nice. And the colors are very rich and saturated on this model. I really like them. In general, I like to play Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games on this model. I think it's just a really good fit for this vertical form factor. And honestly, if I was to pick an ultimate Pokemon machine, I think this would probably be the one. It just seems really fitting with these colored buttons. But all the same, this has about the same performance as the others. It can do Super Nintendo and below. It can play a few PS1 games, but honestly, I wouldn't count on it. And like with the others, you have to go in and do a software shutdown. Anyway, that's the Anbernic RG300, one of my favorite devices in the $50 price range. Up next, we have the Anbernic RG280V. This has been out for about a year now, and I've made a video about this one recently. It's one of my favorite handheld devices altogether. You know, it's just really well made. I don't like the fact that it has a mono speaker on the back, but other than that, I love just about everything with this device. And what really made me fall in love with this device is the custom Atom firmware image, which I've loaded up onto it. And I've done a couple videos about the Atom firmware, so just check them out on this channel, but basically this really streamlines the user experience. It's super responsive and very beautiful and just a joy to navigate. Now when it comes to performance, this one is a little bit better than the ones we've seen previously. You can play most PS1 games on this no problem. But mostly I actually use this for Game Boy Advance. As you can see here, I've done about 3.5 hours of Metroid Zero Mission on this device. This is the device I throw in my pocket anytime we're going to go and run an errand. It's a lot of fun to play with. It does have a strange screen resolution at 320 by 480. The 480 is actually because the vertical pixels are half height, and that makes it so that the math is a little bit weird looking. But all the same, it has a beautiful display and it works really well. At 2.8 inches, it's a little bit on the small side, but I think it works perfectly with the size of this device. And like I said, most PS1 games run on this, and they run really well. Here's Wipeout XL looking really great. All in all, the combination of the Atom firmware image and the quality buttons and D-pad on this device make this one a no-brainer. One of my favorites in this price range. And finally, we have the Play Go. This is also known as the Pocket Go V2 or the Powkitty Q80. This usually runs for about $50 and has the same chip as the RG280V that we just saw. Now, right off the bat, I will say the biggest shortcoming of this device is this little analog nub here. It's pretty terrible. I just wouldn't count on using it at all. But that aside, it works really well. It's got all of your shoulder and trigger buttons up top, a user replaceable battery, and a nice 3.5-inch display. And like with the 280V, the performance on this is pretty good. It can play most PS1 games and everything below that as well. And honestly, if it had a better analog stick, I think I would like this one even better, but as you can see here, it barely even works at all. I mostly just don't touch it and use the D-pad myself. It's actually the smallest of the 3.5-inch models in this chipset. It's smaller than the RG350, which is another popular version. And this screen is just beautiful. I don't know how they got such a nice screen in such a cheap device. It sticks out a little bit from the device and makes it pop just a little bit. It's a really nice touch. And honestly, the red color really sold me on it. You can also find it in white and black. Okay, now for the main event. Here's Salacious Crumb. This guy is willing to spend up to $80 on a device. We're going to start with the Anbernic RG350P. Now this is almost exactly like the Playgo we just saw, but it has better buttons, better D-pad, dual analog sticks, as well as an HDMI out. It also has a nice translucent case option, and it has dual speakers as well. It's a bit bigger than the Playgo, but honestly, it's pretty comfortable to hold in the hands anyway. And the buttons and D-pad on this are top-notch. This is basically the same design they've been using on all their devices since. And like with the others, the performance is going to be the same. This is a PS1 and below option, it can run the Atom firmware image, and honestly, it's just a solid system when it comes to playing those games. Okay, we're going to stick with the same chipset for one more model. This is the Anbernic RG300X. This one just recently came out, so it costs upwards of $80. It's modeled after the Game Boy Micro, and it's a very comfortable feeling handheld. The buttons in particular are spaced out quite a bit, which makes it really comfortable for bigger hands. This one also has HDMI out. And it has a lot of design tweaks modeled after the Game Boy Micro, like the light up start and select buttons and these chrome shoulder and trigger buttons. Now the shiny veneer they've used on this device does pick up a lot of fingerprints, but all in all, it's a really great device. The screen is a little bit smaller, it's only 3 inches, but it is a high resolution screen. It is a 640 by 480 display, the highest resolution you'll see in this video. And the themes on the Atom image for this 640 by 480 display really pop. It's one of those things that you really have to see to believe. It does look really nice. I think in particular, PS1 really shines on this device. It's just a joy to play. And I do think the $80 price point for this is a little bit high. I think it would be much better as a $70 or even $60 device. But it does have some really great design. For example, the front plate is just one solid piece of glass. It looks really beautiful. When you pick this thing up, you know you're holding something that's really quality. To be honest, it feels like it's made by Nintendo. And the device is such high quality that the cat just jumped on my lap, so let's do a quick cat break. This is Chicken, she's 13 years old if you haven't seen her in any of my previous videos, but she often likes to jump on my lap when I'm filming. And when she decides to do that, I typically like to show just a little bit of her, and she never likes to get on camera, but as you can see, here's half of my cat. It's finally starting to cool off here in Hawaii, so I expect her to be jumping on my lap more often in the coming months, usually from November through May, so expect to see a lot of Chicken here in the future. Anyway, I think that's enough for a cat break, let's move on to the rest of the video. But yeah, as I was saying, the RG300X is a great device. It is a bit of a fingerprint magnet, but other than that, it is very pocketable and fun to carry. Okay, last but certainly not least is the Powkiddy RGB10. A couple things to note here. This is actually a modded version I'm using here, so it has a metal shell, a PS Vita analog stick, and an upgraded screen. But the buttons are all original, and honestly the plastic version of this is really good too. It's a bare bones device, it only has a mono speaker, but it has a very convenient USB-A port on the bottom for Wi-Fi dongles. Now this device is quite a bit more powerful than the other ones in this video. It's running the RK3326 chipset. And while this chip is starting to age when it comes to premier handhelds, for budget handhelds it's still really great. Because in addition to playing PS1 and below perfectly, it can also play quite a few Nintendo 64, PSP, Dreamcast, and Nintendo DS games as well. The display on this is not the most high resolution, it's 480 by 320, but all the same, it scales perfectly for Game Boy Advance. So if you really enjoy Game Boy Advance, these games are going to look incredible on this. And while you can find RK3326 devices for cheaper, like the RK2020, I do think that the RGB10 is probably the best one you can find for the money. It's relatively compact and lightweight and makes it very pocketable. Now, if we're going to talk about retro handhelds, I think we need to talk about the Retroid Pocket devices as well. And the Retroid Pocket 2 came out last year for $80 plus shipping, and for that price, the performance was really good. But being that it was an Android device, the lack of touchscreen and only 1GB of RAM really held the device back. Well, just last week, they announced the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. This has a much faster processor, double the RAM, and a touchscreen. And this one's available for pre-order right now, and I really don't like hyping up things that haven't been released yet, but I do think this one is really promising. Retroid has already released 2 other devices that were fairly solid, and I think this one's going to have quite a bit of improvements. So for $99 plus shipping, this one is something to consider as well, because I don't think in the sub $100 price point, you're going to find anything as powerful as this for some time to come. So if a budget handheld is on your radar, this should be part of the conversation as well. And of course, I'll do a full review of this as soon as I get one. Okay, so wrapping things up here, let's talk about our 3 characters again, Jeffrey, Veronica, and Salacious Crumb. And for each of these categories, I do have a favorite, so let's talk about what I would pick if I could only pick one in each of these categories. For the $30 to $40 price range, I would pick the Powkiddy V90. I love the clamshell design of this, and it works really well when you're playing handheld systems like Game Boy Color or even Game Boy Advance. For that middle range, $50 to $60, by far I love the Anbernic RG280V. It has a really good build quality and it's super pocketable. It's just a lot of fun to play. Now, I wouldn't expect to play this more than say 20 or 30 minutes at a time because of how small it is, but all the same, it's really fun. And finally, at that $70 to $80 price range, my money is on the Powkiddy RGB10. For $80, it has pretty good performance. It can play some Nintendo 64, PSP, and Dreamcast. And on top of that, it runs Emulation Station natively through custom firmwares like ArcOS, so it's a really nice experience. And so yeah, that's really about it for this video. I wanted to show off my favorite devices within these different price categories, and also show you some of the tools that I use when I'm shopping around for new devices. And I hope that depending on what category you fall into, Jeffrey, Veronica, or Salacious Crumb, this has been helpful for you. So let me know down in the comments below if there's any other devices that you would have picked in these price points and why. I'm always interested to hear other people's opinions on this budget category. As always, thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.